Python Practice Problems, video number 5, Iteration, or Loops. I'm Stephen Marcus, and I'm doing a series of Python practice videos. There's a link in the description to my short introduction video that tells who I am and how these videos are being done and what to expect. Also in the description is a link to this Jupyter Notebook without the answers so that you can go through it on your own, either before you watch the video or with me as I do the problems. Furthermore, in the description are a list of links to use as a starting point for your search for how to complete each problem. To use this video, I'm assuming that you've either gone through my first 4 videos or have a solid grasp on conditionals and the Python print and input functions. Also, I'll be using Python 3. So, let's jump on in to problem number 1. This one's pretty simple if you've not tried it yet. Use a loop to print hello name to Forrest, Jenny, Mama, and Bubba for I in keep my spacing straight here. Print hello, and it's already a string, so that's pretty well it. This was really straightforward. The biggest thing about loops is making sure that you've got your colon, and with this, these are just listing the different parts of the loop, so they're all just in quotes and separated by commas, so that's pretty straightforward. Now if you could make it more complicated by putting in curly braces, especially if you're coming from other languages, you might get confused and try to remember how loops are done. This actually works, but it makes a dictionary instead of just a simple list of strings. So it messes with the order that they're done in. So there we go. That's number 1. Number 2 is pretty simple as well. Prompt the user for an integer. Enter number of iterations. Loop the number of times specified, each time printing out the count of the loop starting at 0. When printing out the loop count, alternately print the words flip and flop after the number. And there's an example. If you've not tried this one yet, it's pretty simple. Hop out and try it yourself and then come back for the solution. All right, to make this one work, I'm going to make my variable word, and I'm going to call it flop. So I've already initialized it there. I'll use a variable counter, and then I'm going to cast an integer because input is going to put out a string. Enter number of iterations. Okay, our loop for I in range. Range is going to be important in doing loops. What it's going to do is basically represent all of the values are from 0 to the number of counter. Put in my colon. Okay, we need to do our conditional for our flip-flop. If word equals flop, I need a colon. Word equals flip, and it's got to be in quotes. And that should flip it and flop it back and forth. We have to pay attention to where our print statement goes. It needs to be under the loop, but not back here out of the loop, and not so far that it's caught in with the else. So the first thing we need is the count. So I'm going to have to cast that as a string I plus the word. And that would work, but I just know it's going to make it hard to read. So let's go ahead and throw in a space to make it a little bit more readable. Control enter. Number of iterations 5. Flip flop flip flop flip flop flip. So that's pretty straightforward. There's a way that we could do this to where we can control it a little bit better. And I'm going to steal from my first example here and bring it down and say if I'm going to use the modulus operator. So that basically says if it's even, word equals flip, else word equals flop. And again, I can just steal this because that part's the same. And let's give it a shot. 5. There we go. So now I know that the flips are all going to be even and the odds are always going to be flops. Okay, before we move on to number 3, let's take a look at the range function and how it works. The way that the question is set up, it allows us to start at 0, but that's kind of goofy. Let's see if we can make it start at 1. Well, range, you can say 1. Range can take several different arguments. This has started the number 1. And let's run it again with just 5. There we go. But it starts off with 1, but it only gives us 4 iterations. So it's going to run until it gets to counter, but it's still going to be less. It's not going to be less than or equal to. So in order to get the 5th one in there, I'm going to have to add 1. So there we get it, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Another feature of range, if we wanted to go backwards, I could say I'm going to count from 10 down to whatever I put in for a counter. To make that work though, I'm going to have to give it a negative decrement right there. So let's try that. If I say go down to number 3, it starts at 10 and it's not inclusive of 3, but it goes down to until it's more than 3. Also, if we wanted to, we could do this. We're going to say start at 1, count up to the counter, and let's count by 2s. In order to specify this, that has to be the 3rd argument. Okay, since it started by 1s, let's say we want it to be even. There we go. So that's a little bit more on the range. You can look that up and look more into the guts of it. It'll be time well spent. Number 3, you are in charge of 3 projects, Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. Each of these projects has at least 1 host on the dev, test, and prod tiers. Each prod tier has 4 hosts numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. These hosts are named as follows: project tier number, and it gives examples of all the names. Create a program that uses nested loops to print out the names of all the hosts shown in the example. Here's what we're shooting for. So in each tier, there's going to be 4 prods, a test, and a dev. Okay, if you've not tried this one yet, hop out, try it, and then come back for the solution. Okay, the setup for this is pretty simple. For I in alpha, beta, gamma. That's going to be our big loop for, now I can't use I again. I have done this before. You can't use the same counter. That's a good way to confuse it. For j in dev, test, prod. So those are pretty straightforward. At this point, we've got a different numbers of loops for the numbers of the hosts themselves. So we've got to do a comparison here. If j equals prod, then I'm going to make a variable called loop size equals 4. Else loop size just equals 1. Now I can do my 3rd loop. For k in range loop size, here's our print. Print I is a string, so I can just say I plus, I need my dash, plus there's j plus another dash plus, with that second dash we can go ahead and include the 0. Convert to a string. The last one is k. Now remember that loop is going to start at 0 the way I've got it set up, so I'm going to throw in a +1 so that it starts at 1. And let's see if this works. There we go. Dev test prod 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 prod. Beta dev test prod 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 prod. The only problem that we have is it's not written on one line. And we can fix that with getting rid of our new line and putting in that. Now it's got it on one line, but it's got them all on one line. We want it to break between dev test or alpha, beta, and gamma. So let's put our break right here. I can just say put a new line in for every big loop. There we go. That's number 3. On to number 4. Number 4, prompt the user for an integer. Enter number of iterations. Loop the number of times specified, each time printing the count of the loop on a single line starting at 1. Then on the same line, print from the specified number back to 1 and only print the highest number once. This one's not bad. It's basically just using the range function. If you've not tried it yet, hop out, pause the video, and come back for the solution. Okay. I'm just going to call it count. I know it's got to be an integer, so I'm going to cast it that way. Input enter number of iterations. There, make it look nice. In range. Now I can see that I want to start at 1, so I'm going to go ahead and give it its starting point of 1, which means my count has to have 1 added to it to make it to the end. Now we're ready for our print statement. Print I is going to have to be cast as a string. Let's just give that a shot. Number of iterations 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's got the numbers that we want. We just need to get it on a single line, which we can do by specifying the end, and I'm going to make it use a space. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I just have to do the same thing again, and I can use my same I again since I'm done with it. Range. Now it's going to be counting backwards from our count to 0, and I know it has to be -1. And I'll actually reuse my print command here. Let's try it again. Gotta have a colon. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I've got my highest number twice. So in order to fix that, I'm going to say, okay, start one number lower. There we go. That's number 4. On to number 5. Number 5. Prompt the user for an integer. Enter number of iterations. Draw a pattern of stars or asterisks on consecutive lines starting with 1 star and going up to the specified number of stars. Then reverse the process back to 1. We're going to draw a pretty little shape. If you haven't tried this, pause the video and hop out. Come back for the solution. Okay, let's start off with the obvious. I'm going to make a variable called s. It's going to be cast as an int. Input. Enter number of iterations for I in range of s. Print, there's my star, times, now remember s is going to start at 0 and it's going to run to whatever number I put in there. Times 0 is not going to work, so I'm going to say I plus 1. And let's see how that works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that part's pretty good. Now I've got to count back down to 1 again. So that's just going to be another for loop for I in range again of s. But this time we need to give it something besides just s. We don't want to have the maximum number twice, so I'm going to start with one number less than s, and I'm counting back to 0, and remember it's not inclusive of that endpoint, so 0 works. And I'm doing a negative decrement. I'm going backwards, so the print statement should be pretty much the same times, and actually I can get by with I this time. It's a lot simpler than it looks. Alright, that's 5. On to number 6. Number 6. Set a variable named lower to 5 and a variable named upper to 12. Prompt the user for an integer. Enter a number between 5 and 12. If the user enters a number between 5 and 12, print the number fits. If the number is not between 5 and 12, print that number is outside boundary. Then loop and prompt the user again. If you haven't tried this one yet, pause the video, hop out, and then come back for the solution. Okay, the basics of this start off pretty simple. Let's set two variables. Lower equals 5, upper is 12, and our variable we'll just call num equals, cast it as an integer, input number between, and let's actually use lower and upper. And that'll give us a first little place to check our code. Between 5 and 12. Okay, it took the number, so there's no big flaws so far. Let's print, let's say if lower num upper, that's a three-way kind of a conditional there. Print the number fits. Okay, let's see if that works. Number fits. Okay, so we're good to there. So the next thing we're going to do is to build our loop. And I'm going to set a variable, call it loop equals true. So that is going to force our loop to be true. And then I can say while loop, so I know that it's going to run. This is our first instance of a while loop. To this point we've been doing for loops. The difference is a while loop, you don't know initially how many times you're going to be running through the loop. So alright, I'm going to take this and tab it in because it's going to loop through this. So if the number fits, then I can say loop equals false, and that will break it. Else, print our error message, print the numbers outside the boundary. So the number of the boundary. And then my final it fits statement can be there at the end. Okay, let's give this a shot. Between 5 and 12, 8, the number fits. Run it again, 99, number is outside the boundary, and it loops again. If I say 1, it loops again until I give it a number that's in the boundary. Okay, so that's an example of a while loop. On to number 7. Number 7. Prompt the user for a string, enter new password. The password must have both uppercase and lowercase letters and be longer than 8 characters. If the user enters a string that does not meet these requirements, print bad password, please try again, then loop back and request again. When a good password is entered, print new password accepted. Okay, if you've not tried this yet, pause the video, hop out, and then come back for the solution. Okay, we need to set a couple of variables to begin with. Password length equals 8. And what this really needs is a do-while loop. And Python doesn't have a do-while loop, so I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called loop and force it to true so that it will go through the loop at least once. So let's set up our loop. While loop. And if you never change the state of loop, you have an endless loop. So that's something to look out for. Okay, the first thing we need to do is to get input from the user. So I'm going to just call P for the password attempt. Let's see what my prompt actually is. Enter new password. Enter new password. And that puts out a string, and a string is what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and just make some more variables. I'm going to P up for uppercase, and then P low for lowercase. And then what we need is the count. The count equals, this is length of P. So we've got variables that contain the password that was entered in forced to all uppercase, and then forced to all lowercase. Let's see what our next step is. So now we need to do a conditional to say if P equals P low, meaning that it was all lowercase to begin with and nothing changed, which would be bad, or similarly P up, or P count is less than my password length. And just for looks mostly, I'm going to go ahead and put that all in parentheses. If any of those winds up being true, print bad password, please try another. Else, I got to kill my loop. I don't need to loop anymore. And then I can print password accepted. All right, let's give this a shot. If I make my password, that's enough characters, but it's all small case, so it's bad. That's more, but it's all uppercase. There's upper and lower case, and it's greater than 8. Password accepted. So that's what we're looking for. Okay, before we move on away from problem number 7, let's see if we can tighten this up a little bit. I've added 3 variables here that don't absolutely have to be there. We can redo this. P low could just become P dot lower, and P up could just be just the same way that I got it up here, and then P count would change to just the length of P. And then I can save myself 3 variables. There we go. Yep. There we go. That still works, and I've saved myself 3 variables, so that's good. Now number 8. Prompt the user for a width, height, and fill. So 2 integers and a string. Draw the outline of a box if fill is false, and a filled in box if fill is true. So fill is just going to be represented either with a large or a small y, and it's going to draw the boxes just like I've got them here. If you haven't tried this one yet, hop out, pause the video, and come back. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into this. Width can be first, and it's got to be an integer. Input inner width. Height equals same thing. Inner height, and fill is going to be inner fill. Okay, so the first thing I'm really going to need to do is to fix fill if fill equals capital Y or a small y equals true, else equals. So there I've changed my fill from a string into a Boolean that actually I can use and I can set up my loop with now. So I know I'm going to have to print a solid row of stars for the top and for the bottom. So print, there's my star times width. I'm going to space that out so it looks a little bit better. I know I'll have that, and I know I'll actually have that twice because I'll have the top and the bottom. Now in between that is going to be my loop, and since I know how many iterations that I've got, my iteration is going to be my height minus 2, then that's a case for a for loop. So for I in range height minus 2, because I'm taking out the top and the bottom. And now the difference is going to be in whether the fill is there or not. So I can say if fill, let's do it this way, if fill, that's pretty straightforward. It's just the same thing again. Print star times the width. Else, got to have my colon. Print, I'm going to have a star at the beginning plus spaces times a certain number, which is going to be my width minus 2 for the very first and the very last, plus another asterisk at the very end. And that should pretty well look like it. Let's give it a shot. Width, let's say 5, height 5, fill it in. There we go. Run him again. 6, 6, inner fill, nope. And there we go. Now one thing that you could do further on this one is to do a better job of sanity checking, because I'm really just checking if it's a capital Y or a small y, and anything else goes. So it would be good to filter out for width and height below 0, or putting in text for one of those. There's more I could do with sanity checking, but we've got the logic on how to make it draw the box now. On to number 9. Number 9. Prompt the user for an integer. Determine if the number is prime or not. If the number is not prime, print one set of factors. If it is prime, print the number is prime. This is just using a loop to brute force whether or not something is prime. And if it does find a factor, it prints it out and then stops. It's not going to print out all the factors. It's just going to print out one to prove that it's not prime. Okay, if you haven't tried this yet, pause the video, hop out, and then come back for the solution. Okay, the first thing we need to do is I'm going to set my variable to test equals, got to cast it as an integer, input, enter an integer. Okay, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to assume that it is prime to begin with, and then when I find a factor, if I find a factor, I'm going to knock that prime flag down. That Boolean variable called prime, I'm calling it a flag. So now I need a for loop that's going to go from, where does it need to go from? For I in range. Well, we can actually start at 2 because 0 and 1 are not going to count if we're talking about prime, and it's going to go all the way up to test. There's my loop. Now I need to do my conditional. If my test number modulus my counter, which is I, equals 0, meaning that it is evenly divisible, then I print out my statement. Num, or not num, test. Test is my variable that I put in. Is not prime. Then I need to put what the factors actually are. So there's one of my factors, the counter itself. Got to put a plus there. Plus times, and then we need the other one, which we're going to have to cast as a string, and it is going to be my test number divided by I. Now that's going to return something that could return a float, which is going to be confusing, so I'm going to force that into an integer. Okay, that times that plus equals, and again there, and I think I've even got the right number of parentheses. The big thing to leave out are the pluses. My next step is to knock down that prime flag, and then I'm going to use something we've not covered yet, a break. So once I've found a pair of factors, then I can go ahead and just break completely out of it, and I'm done. The final thing that I need to do is just print out if prime print it is prime. Alright, let's give this a shot. Enter an integer. 7 I know is prime. It is prime. Let's put in 18, which I know is not prime. And that even makes sense. The final thing to show you is something I think it's a little counterintuitive. Here we've got on its own, if it's still prime, if my flag is still true, then print that it's prime. Python will also let you do an else in conjunction with a for. So for this, and if none of this works, then do the else. So it works just the same way. So you've got an else to go with your for, and that may even be a little bit cleaner for this problem. Okay, on to the more difficult ones. Number 10. Create a variable holding an integer. Prompt the user to guess what the number is. If the user's guess is lower than the number, print lower. If the user's guess is higher, print higher. If the user guesses the number, print you got it, new number. Then generate a new number and start over again. If the user guesses 0, print finished and end the program. Yeah, this one's not too bad. If you haven't tried it yet, pause the video, hop out, and come back for the solution. Okay, let me scroll up a little bit here. I'm going to start with my number. Number equals 12. That's going to give me a starting point for my number. And I need to guess my number. So I'm going to make my G for a terrible variable name. Got to cast it as an int, input, guess the number. I'm going to go ahead on into the logic here. If G is less than num, print the number is higher if G is less. Else if G is greater than the number, print lower. If G equals the number, print you got it, new number. And to calculate a new number, just did it real simply, just added 12 to it. So let's go ahead and make the loop now. Don't know how many times we're going to iterate through this, so a for loop's not going to work. I'm going to effectively do a do while loop. And all this is going to have to be indented in. So I'm going to highlight it, hit tab, So there's my loop. Now when I do this, when I just say true loop, I've got to have something in here that changes the state of that, or it's just going to sit there and loop forever. So the trick was, if you put in a 0, that was finished. And I need to catch that first. If I put it down here, the 0 is going to be caught by, it's going to be g is less than num, and it's going to be caught. So I have to put it up higher. So if g equals 0, print finished. And then I need a way to kill my loop. I could either do break, and that actually works, or do loop equals false. Now I've got two ifs here, one after another. I need to make that an elif, and if it bothers you, you can throw an else at the end and say print oops, because if it ever triggers that, something serious has gone wrong. I'm going to look through for my colons and make sure I have those, and I think I'm ready to give it a shot. Guess the number. 25 should be lower, 5 should be higher. My number is 12, and I got it. And then now if I say 12 again, it should be higher because it's looking for the new number. And if I say 0, I'm finished. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. On to number 11. Prompt the user for a float, enter goal amount. Prompt the user for another float, enter start amount. Prompt the user for a float, enter interest rate. Prompt the user for an integer, print the total every X number of years. Using loops and not outright math, calculate the number of years it takes to get from a start amount to a goal amount given the interest rate specified. Then print updates at the interval specified. So this is just going to be a simple interest problem. If you've not tried it yet, pause the video, hop out, and then come back for the solution. All right, I've got a good bit of information to bring in to begin with. My goal, and it's going to be a float. Input, enter goal amount. My next is going to be my start. How much money I'm starting with. The next is going to be the interest rate. Interest equals float, put interest rate. And finally, this is going to be an integer. I'm going to make it year, and it's cast as an integer. Next number of years. Okay, so we've got our information in now. Okay, this is another one where we don't know how many times we're going to iterate, so this doesn't lend itself very much to a for loop. It's going to be a while loop. So my while loop is going to look something like while I'm going to have a variable, a running total, and while that is less than my goal, it's going to iterate through and calculate. Couple of other things that I may need is an index, because I want to count the number of times that it goes through. That's going to give me my number of years. So I'm going to start it off at 0, and I also want to fix my interest rate. I want the user to be able to put in like 5% or whatever. So I want to flip that around to, instead of a 0.05, I want it to be 0.95. So that's going to look like 1 plus the interest divided by 100. So that way, if it's a 5% increase, it's going to be multiplied by 1.05 each time it loops. So that's got my interest in the way that I want it. Okay, the math on it's pretty simple. Total equals total times. Okay, my total to begin with is going to need to be my starting amount. So I'm going to just say total equals start. So that gives me my jumping off point, where the amount that I start off with. And then I can do my interest rate from there. index equals index plus 1, and that's going to give me my years. And then I'm going to need an if my index is divisible, there you go, use the modulus of the year there. If it goes in evenly, then I'm going to print out what it's looking for, year plus convert to a string my index plus, I want a colon there, plus, and then I can just cast as a string my total, which that's going to look funky. Why don't I just go ahead and put that in a monetary format, which that would work for testing. I'm going to go ahead and just fix it though. Curly braces, cool. The comma will actually put in commas every 3 characters for me. Dot format total, and that actually comes in as a string, but you do have to get your quotes in the right place there. And the last thing that I need to do kind of outside my loop is the final print my index plus years, and that should be it. So I'll run it with my example, 100,000 to 25,000, 5% interest rate every 5 years, and that's actually pretty funny. I put that's funny enough to leave in there. That looks a lot better. 29 years. That's what we got with that. And yeah, there are mathematical ways to do that a lot easier, but that gives us a good example of how to brute force it with a loop. Okay, number 12. Prompt the user for a grade. Enter a grade. Allow the user to enter grades one at a time. The user is to enter the word done when finished. After done is entered, print the highest grade, lowest grade, average, and number of grades. If anything other than a grade or done is entered, print bad entry and prompt for another grade. Okay, if you haven't tried this one, pause the video, hop out, and come back. Okay, I've got several things that I need to get set up first. A total, a count, the lowest grade. I'm going to set it to something crazy high to begin with. And the highest grade, I'm going to set it to 0 to begin with. So I'm going to set up my loop just as forcing it true. And the first thing I need to do is get my input. So I'm going to make my variable grade string, just kind of highlight that it is a string. Input, enter a grade. The first thing I want to do is to check if my grade string equals done, and beyond that, and not count. I don't want it to happen if you don't have anything for a count, if you've not put any grades in yet. So this is where I'm going to print out print highest grade. I need the colon. Cast as a string high, print lowest grade, print number of grades, and that is just going to be my count. Print average. Left out my plus. And the total divided by the count is going to give me my average. And this all works because I am taking grade string as a string. So the next thing I need to do is to take in the grades if they are numbers. And to get that to work, they're going to have to do a try and an except. So try, and what I'm going to try to do is to take a variable called grade and to cast as a float grade string. Now if that doesn't work, I'm going to give a bad entry. Okay, so the rest of this is just doing the logic on it. So total equals total plus grade. If grade is greater than high, then high equals grade. If grade is less than low, low equals grade. And the last thing I need to do is to increment my count every time I put a new grade in. Now before I get going too far, one thing that I need to look for, I always look for my colons to make sure they're all okay, and I think they are. But kind of the kiss of death with loops, I've forced this to true, so if I don't have an escape someplace, I'm going to have an infinite loop, and I don't see a place where I have a break, so it needs to come right here. Break. Now I have a way to break out of my loop. So let's see if we can make it work. 100, 50, 75, 25, and done. So there we go. It gave me 4 grades. It got my low and my high and my average. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for watching. If you feel that you've gotten anything from this video, please hit the like button. This video is one of my first Python practice problem videos, so I'm anxious to see if there's enough interest to continue creating them. If you'd like to be notified when I create new Python videos, please hit subscribe. If there's enough interest, I would like to create more Python videos that go beyond just the basics. I would like to eventually do problems that are more like you would find in a real-world environment. I would also like to consider branching out into other languages like R or C++. Thanks again for watching.